Battle of Lewes. The untold story of Lewes. What happens when a king spends too much, trusts the wrong people, and ignores the very nobles who hold his kingdom together? How does a prince known for vengeance and impulsive cavalry charges end up chasing pitchfork-wielding Londoners into a river? Why did one of the most powerful men in Europe end up surrendering in a flour-covered panic inside a mill? And when the dust settles, England will have two rulers, one crown, and a whole lot of explaining to do. So grab your goblet, sharpen your curiosity, and stay with us to the end, because this isn't just history. This is medieval madness. It all began in 1216, when little Henry III, just 8 years old, inherited the crown. Picture it, a pint-sized monarch with a crown too big for his head and a regency council running the kingdom like a medieval daycare. That regency ended in 1227, and Henry came of age, which, in royal terms, meant he could now make questionable decisions all by himself. Henry had a knack for two things: spending money he didn't have and trusting people he probably shouldn't. His chief ministers, handpicked during his crusading absences, treated England like their personal piggy bank. They seized control of great offices meant to check royal power and turned them into tools of self-enrichment. Meanwhile, Henry had his eyes on Sicily, not for vacation, but to gift it to his son Edmund. The Pope agreed, but then sent Henry a bill so steep it could have funded a cathedral made of gold. Parliament refused to help, so Henry turned to the clergy and said, "Surprise, you're paying." Add to this Henry's obsession with foreign advisors, his wife's Savoyard relatives, and his Lusignan half-brothers, and you've got a royal court that looked more like a continental cocktail party than an English council. Native barons were furious. Enter Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, crusader, noble, and Henry's former BFF turned political nemesis. Simon wasn't always Henry's headache. When he returned from France, Henry welcomed him with lands, titles, and a spot as household knight. But then Simon secretly married Eleanor, Henry's widowed sister, in 1238. The king was livid, the church was scandalized, and Simon was suddenly rich and controversial. After fighting valiantly in the Crusades, Simon came back with a sharpened sword and an even sharper opinion. Henry was a terrible leader. The king's refusal to meet with barons and his autocratic style led to a confrontation in May 1258. Simon and other nobles demanded reforms, and Henry was forced to accept the provisions of Oxford, which created a council of 15 barons to advise him. A proto-parliament, if you will. But Henry wasn't about to let his power slip away quietly. He tried bribing the barons with gifts, think medieval gift baskets, but Simon wasn't buying it. After 6 years of tension, both sides turned to King Louis XIII of France to settle the matter. Louis, ever the monarch's monarch, sided with Henry and annulled the provisions. Simon's response? Fine, we'll settle this the old-fashioned way, with swords. Spring 1264, war drums echoed across England. Both sides roamed the countryside, gathering support and capturing castles like kids collecting trading cards. On Palm Sunday, Prince Edward, Henry's son and future Edward I, captured Northampton and took Simon's son prisoner. Oxford scholars fought fiercely with longbows, crossbows, and slings, basically turning their campus into a medieval war zone. Simon retaliated by besieging Rochester Castle, but the royalist garrison held out for 8 days. Then came troubling news. Henry's army was threatening London. Simon abandoned the siege and marched northwest to intercept him. But Henry wasn't aiming for London. He wanted Kent and Sussex, the gateway to France and his continental allies. The royal army moved southeast, capturing strongholds and finally resting at Lewes in Sussex. Henry stayed at St. Pancras Priory, while Prince Edward occupied Lewes Castle. Simon's forces camped at Fletching, 8 miles north. The Royalists had 9,000 to 10,000 men, including 1,500 armored knights, double Simon's numbers. On May 13, bishops delivered Simon's terms: withdraw and pay 50,000 marks if Henry agreed to obey the annulled provisions of Oxford. Henry scoffed. "By God's head," he thundered, "I fear you more than all the thunder and lightning in the world." Yes, that's a real quote. The man had a flair for drama. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel, you're stepping into a world of thrilling battles. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. European battle, where legends clash. But the royalists saw this not as diplomacy, but desperation. To them, Simon's offer reeked of weakness, like a knight showing up to a duel with a butter knife. Prince Edward, Henry's son and future Edward I, aka Longshanks, wasn't having it. He declared he'd only be satisfied if Simon was hanged for treason, preferably with a crowd and a trumpet fanfare. Edward wasn't just a warrior, he was vengeance wrapped in chainmail. With battle looming, Simon led his men from Fletching, north of Lewes. His troops wore white crosses stitched onto their tunics, not for fashion, but to avoid stabbing each other in the chaos. At first light on May 14th, they began their march. Simon, ever the chivalrous rebel, refused a night attack. Cowardly and dishonorable, he said, probably while sipping something stern and medieval. But Simon's odds weren't great. His most seasoned commanders had been captured earlier, leaving him with a patchwork army of nobles, Londoners, and a few pitchfork-wielding patriots. Still, they ascended Offham Hill, a steep vantage point that overlooked the countryside like a medieval drone shot. King Henry, in a move that would make any general weep, failed to properly guard the area around Offham Hill. Simon's forces approached undetected, creeping within sight of St. Pancras Priory's bell tower, where Henry still slumbered, likely dreaming of Sicilian crowns and tax hikes. Simon's army halted and organized into 3 divisions, or battles. Their numbers? Somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 men, plus 600 cavalry. Foot soldiers wore padded gambesons to absorb mace blows, and some Londoners improvised with pitchforks and scythes, because nothing says revolution like farming tools turned weapons. Center, led by Gilbert de Clare, Earl of Gloucester, aka Gilbert the Red, a fiery-haired lieutenant with a sword and a grudge. Right wing, commanded by Henry de Montfort, Simon's son and a seasoned soldier. Left wing, led by Sir Henry de Hastings, or possibly Sir Nicholas Seagrave, depending on which medieval gossip you trust, composed mostly of lightly armed Londoners with more heart than experience. Behind them stood a reserve force of Londoners. At the rear, baggage wagons and Simon's personal cart, a 4-wheeled chariot from which he directed operations, having recently broken his leg. Yes, Simon went to war in a cart. That's commitment. About a quarter-mile from Lewes, Simon gave the order, charge. His forces surprised English troops who were casually training their horses, probably expecting breakfast, not battle. The English were overrun, and the alarm was raised. King Henry, ever the brave monarch, led from the front. His knights wore chainmail or plate armor, and their horses were draped in protective gear like medieval tanks. At his side, his brother Richard, Earl of Cornwall, and Prince Edward commanding the right flank. Edward, praised for his military prowess but known for his cruelty and thirst for vengeance, deployed first, impulsively. He didn't wait for the rest of the army. He charged straight into the baronial left wing like a battering ram with a personal vendetta. Hastings' wing was the first to make contact. Edward's cavalry smashed into their lines. What followed was brutal close combat. Formations dissolved, and knights fought in chaotic duels with maces and heavy swords. The baronial troops were outclassed. Hastings' cavalry retreated, leaving foot soldiers and Londoners to face Edward's wrath. The London infantry, inexperienced and terrified, broke ranks and fled. Some ran west into the woods. Others tried to cross the River Ouse. Edward, fueled by a grudge against Londoners, pursued them for 4 miles. His horsemen cut down many, and dozens drowned in the river. During the chase, Edward's cavalry stumbled upon Simon's baggage train and personal cart. They found 3 prisoners. No questions asked, they were killed. Then came the looting. Edward's men ransacked the baggage train like it was Black Friday at a medieval market. But Edward's absence left King Henry without cavalry support. Still, Henry believed his superior numbers and elite swordsmen would carry the day. He was wrong, but that twist. As the sun climbed over Sussex on May 4, 1264, King Henry III, still groggy from his rude awakening, made a bold decision. He ordered his army to charge uphill against Simon de Montfort's smaller force perched atop Offham Hill. Now, charging uphill in full armor is like sprinting through a swamp in steel boots, ambitious, exhausting, and historically unwise. Halfway up the slope, the royalist troops began to tire. Their breath came in gasps, their formations loosened, and their confidence wavered. Simon, watching from his cart like a warlord in a chariot, saw his moment. He ordered a full countercharge. His troops surged downhill with gravity on their side and vengeance in their hearts. The clash was brutal. The battlefield disintegrated into a disorganized melee, a chaotic swirl of swords, shields, and shouted curses. Though outnumbered, Simon's forces had the high ground and used it masterfully, pushing back Henry's exhausted troops with spears, maces, and sheer momentum. On the royalist left, Richard of Cornwall, Henry's brother and the self-styled King of the Romans, fought valiantly. But without the support of the king's household cavalry, thanks to Edward's earlier joyride, his forces were overwhelmed. They fled toward the River Ouse, and Richard himself sought refuge in a nearby mill known as the Mill of the Hyde. Now, if you're imagining a noble retreat into a fortified structure, think again. This was a working mill, flour, grain, and one very panicked royal. Soon, an armed mob surrounded the building. Richard, trapped and humiliated, was forced to surrender. Legend has it, he was found hiding in the mill's trough, covered in flour and regret. King Henry, ever the stubborn monarch, fought on. But the tide had turned. Whether captured in the melee or during his retreat toward Lewes, he was taken prisoner. The royalist line broke entirely. Infantry scattered, knights fled, and the once mighty army dissolved into a full rout. Prince Edward, fresh from his 4-mile vengeance tour against Londoners, returned to Lewes expecting triumph. Instead, he found chaos. The royalist forces were in full retreat. Simon de Montfort was in control. Edward, still itching for a fight, wanted to revive the battle and confront Simon personally. But his men were exhausted, outnumbered, and frankly not interested in dying for a lost cause. With no options left, Edward agreed to enter custody. The streets of Lewes were strewn with the dead and dying. The abbot of St. Pancras Priory estimated the death toll at 2,700, mostly peasants. Knights, with their expensive armor and noble blood, were spared for ransom. Peasants, sadly, had no such value. Edward remained in captivity for over a year. King Henry spent the night in St. Pancras Priory, not as a ruler but as a captive. On May 15th, negotiations began. The exact terms of the agreement, known as the Mise of Lewes, are lost to history, but its impact was seismic. Simon de Montfort emerged as the de facto ruler of England. Henry retained his crown, but real power shifted to a council of barons, church leaders, and town representatives, led by Simon, Gilbert the Red, and the Bishop of Chichester. England now had 2 rulers, one ceremonial, one actual. But the Barons' War was far from over. The embers of rebellion still glowed, and the next great clash was already brewing. Next up, the Battle of Bannockburn. And that, dear viewers, is how a broken leg, a flower-covered royal, and a prince with a vengeance complex reshaped English history. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another tale of medieval madness, royal drama, and battlefield brilliance. More intrigue awaits, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.